welcome back everybody. It's Chris Nichols here from PetaPixel, and I have been whining at Nikon to create a full-frame ZFC since before the ZFC. And well, look at that. We finally have it. We have a pre-production Nikon ZF to play with here. We're gonna do a two-part shoot. We're gonna do a night shoot today, a day shoot tomorrow. Should be a lot of fun. Let's get to it. Well, Jordan, now that Nikon makes this brand new modern camera that looks exactly like my vintage camera, I guess I don't need to use this anymore.
Just give it away to a passerby or throw it in the garbage.
No, it's still worth something, Jordan. I'm going to use our preferred trade-in partner, KEH.com.
Oh, I always forget about them.
Yeah, do you know they'll actually give me a 10% trade-in bonus if I sell them this towards something brand new like this? You see, it gets rid of all the hassle having to buy and sell stuff privately, and I don't even need to put a roll of film through and make sure this is still working. Haven't touched it in years because their experts will take this and make sure that everything's working great. So it's just so easy for me. That's why I'm going to use our preferred trading partner, KEH.com, and not going to just give it away to somebody. Jordan?
Oh, sorry.
Wait, do you want it? Okay, so let's talk about the Nikon ZF's handling here. Now, this is definitely a lot like the ZFC as far as the styling goes, but it is physically larger and heavier, a little bit of a thicker grip on this. This is about 710 grams, so third of a knot. And I will say here, the grip on it with the extra weight, I feel like I want more to hold on to. Luckily, there is an optional package that Nikon's going to release with the ZF where you can get a proprietary hand grip. Attaches on the bottom, gives you an Arca Swiss dovetail for tripod mounting, still have access to the battery and memory card slots, and it also now does give you a bigger grip around here. So I think I definitely want to play with that as soon as that's available. Now, of course, the ZF series are vintage-inspired cameras, so we got really nice tall command dials here on top. So first over here on the left, we've got an ISO dial. This is now improved, though. The Z6 II would go up to 51,200. This now goes up to 64,000 ISO. It's the same sensor that we have in the Z6 II, but thanks to the new processing capabilities, we can push a little bit higher. We've also got our mode selector switch here. This is where we go between manual, aperture priority, shutter priority, program, or full auto. We've got a great shutter control here, up to 8,000th of a second, so I've got all that on the side as well. What I do notice, though, which is really cool, right below my shutter dial, I have a selector switch for video and photo, which is great, keeping those separate, but also going straight to a black and white mode. And whatever black and white profile that I've been using last, whether it's monochrome or flat monochrome or deep tone monochrome, it'll remember that, and I just flick that switch to black and white, and I'm shooting classic 70s style. Now, right next to our shutter control dials, we've got our on-off switch, and that's also where you'll find the shutter. It's raised nice and high, and yes, it's threaded for classic cable releases. We've got our exposure compensation dial here. We also have, very much like the ZFC, a little aperture LCD display. It's cute, it's adorable, it's a nod to the past. Just like the ZFC, though, it doesn't maintain your aperture display when the camera's off, and I think that actually would be really nice to have on. Otherwise, we've got two command dials here, and I think, you know, on the ZFC, I didn't mind the thinner dials. It felt fine for me. I got smaller hands, but I think somebody with larger hands is going to appreciate the thicker grip here, the slightly wider profile. All in all, the dials are all very easy to reach and very easy to control. The only complaint I really have with the handling, I guess, is we just don't have a lot of customizable buttons. You got a record button up here for video, and you've got another customizable button down here next to lens mount, and that's it. So at the top of the camera here, we've got our EVF, 3.69 million dots, but it is the same EVF that we have on the Z6 II. So that means it maxes out at a 60 frame per second refresh rate. So it's not going to be the ultra cool lag-free viewfinder that we get in the Z8, Z9, but it still has plenty of detail and it's nice to use. We do have a really nice back panel here because this back panel fully articulates and it's over 2 million dots, so very sharp, very clear to use. Right next to this display panel, you notice distinct lack of autofocusing joystick, but before you get really angry, Nikon has brought back something here that I never thought that they would bring back on a camera, something that we saw on the D5500, and then it disappeared forever, and we're like, why? It was such a great feature, and that is that I can set a touch area on the screen itself, and I can use my thumb to focus the camera. I can move the focusing point around my composition, and I can set what quadrant here, top half, bottom half, left, right, corners, whatever you want. They give you tons of options. You know, even for vertical orientation, you can customize this however you want. So it's a really nice way to get around no autofocusing joystick. So while we're on the topic of focusing on this camera, I do want to point out again, this is pre-production. We can only do so much testing right now, but We do have some promising information here. So first off, this has the same autofocusing algorithms, the deep learning subject detections that we see on the Z8, Z9. So you're getting all of it, right? The animals, the automobiles, the faces, the eyes, all that good stuff. But also the interface from the new cameras, which is way better than what we have on the Z6 and Z7 series of cameras. We get 3D tracking autofocus, for example. And the autofocusing seems to be working really well. And as it's getting darker here tonight, I should point out that this is the only Nikon camera that can go and focus at -10 EV at f1.2. I mean, that's pretty impressive. I think the DF was -1
Don't
EV.
worry about the DF.
Now, that is a very low bar. Like, that bar was rolling in the dirt. So anyways, I cannot wait till we get a full review camera. Then we can actually really test this fully. But what I'm getting so far seems to be working very well, even in the dark. So you've been forgiven for thinking that this is just a minor upgrade to the Z6 II with this retro looking overhaul, but actually under the hood a lot here has changed. So one of the first things that's really unique is now the VR system in here. This has an in-body image stabilization system. It's now rated to 8 stops. Nikon's never had anything that stable before. It also goes beyond that. It's got a very unique feature. So how do I explain this? So on most modern cameras, IBIS works like this. It's doing all of its movements, up, down, left, right, yaw, pitch, roll, all of these movements focused at the center of the frame, and that's where it's going to yaw around, that's where it's going to roll around, that's where it's going to pitch around, and that works great if your subject is most often in the center of the frame. But what often gets neglected is the corners, for example, because that's not where the IBIS is centering itself to really keep its stability as a priority. So what Nikon's doing now is they're setting an option so that you can link the VR to your focusing point. So if my subject happens to be more towards the corner and I focus there, the VR system will now do its movements and its centering around my subject. So I should point out there's some caveats here that I want to make note of. First off, this only works in photo, not in video. In video, you still get VR. You just don't get this link to the autofocusing point function. Also, it only works with Z-mount autofocusing lenses, of course. So if I put on my AI glass tonight, I'm getting VR, but not the maximum efficacy, and I'm not getting that, again, linked to the autofocusing point because they don't autofocus.
I'm confused.
That's okay. Our viewers are mostly smarter than you are, Jordan. So third thing that I want to point out as a caveat, it's not intended to work with telephoto lenses with VR. In that case, it's going to go back to a classic sort of hybrid system using the lenses VR and the body's VR in conjunction with each other to give you excellent stability with telephoto lenses. The real advantage here is going to be when you're using wide-angle lenses primarily and you want your subjects off-center. So I could see this being really beneficial for journalists, wedding photographers, street photographers, that kind of stuff. So it's golden hour right now. We're just capturing as much light as we can before it gets dark. Then we'll do some night shots. But I did bring my Nikon FE and I did bring my vintage AI glass because the first moment that I heard that they're making a vintage inspired full frame camera, I'm like, I'm gonna get an FTZ adapter and throw my glass on there. So I've got the 105 2.5 on here right now. I've been using that a lot. So in a little switcheroo here, Jordan's actually gone to the Laowa 28mm f1.2 manual focus because he thinks that's a good idea in the low light. And I'm gonna go to the autofocusing 40mm f2, which will be soft packaged with the ZF so that I can really test the autofocus in low light, because as you can see, it's getting dark. Okay, so I really wanted to test this -10 EV autofocus capability on the ZF. So we headed into Pin Bar. It's a great location, very dark in there, cool pinball machines, get some shots. But also there's this picture of He-Man as a matador and it's in like near darkness. The camera's focusing, it's actually face detecting on He-Man's face, even though it's a painting. So it was really quite impressive. It did a great job. Actually, Jordan, you know what? While we're doing this in the street, why don't you pull out and just show the lighting that we're shooting here? So this is actually the brand new Westcott L60B. We just got these. It's going through one of their small rapid soft boxes, and you can see the quality of light. It's so much better than these sort of light panels that we used to stick all over the place. So really nice quality of light. Now another really nice option that you can get for these L60Bs is this handle attachment. This handle attachment lets you put light stands on. It's got a spigot fitting in the bottom. It's also got little tripod legs. You can put it on a tabletop, and it runs off of 1 or 2 Sony NP style batteries. So as you can see, it's totally remote. So really nice portable lighting. We're looking forward to using it here and not having to use those tiny panels we were using before. Big thanks to Westcott for being the official lighting sponsor of our show. All right, it is day 2. We are back and we're coming to you now from one of my favorite little industrial sectors here in Calgary. I want to start off the day by talking about the manual focus lens experience because I really insisted on doing that on the ZF. I mean, that's a cool feature for me to play with here. Now, I have to say also my 105 2.5 I was using yesterday, not the sharpest lens. The 85 f2 seems to be doing a better job, but one thing I will say, I really like the manual focus lens shooting experience here on the ZF because we got some new features. Now, first off, like many other Nikon bodies, you do have the option of programming your non-CPU lens data. You can set up all your lenses with a focal length and the maximum aperture, and that does also help the VR in the body to accommodate the right focal length as well. But beyond that, we now have a new feature where not just manual focus assist where I can punch in, but actually utilize the ZF's autofocusing for eye detection and subject detection. So if I'm pointing my lens manual focus at a person, for example, the autofocus point will jump right to their face, even though it's not autofocusing, and I can then punch in on that spot selectively. It'll go right to that spot. Really helpful when I'm trying to focus on the eyes. So just little things to make it more convenient, even though I'm using a manual focus lens. Okay, so I've had a chance to look at some of the files. Remember, this is a pre-production camera, so I can't really open the raw files yet, but we've got the same sensor as the Z6 Mark II. We're gonna get very similar results. We have the same lossless compressed raw files, high efficiency plus we've seen on some of the other cameras, 24 megapixels. One new feature though, and this is a big first for Nikon, we finally have multi-shot mode on a camera. Now, it doesn't process the files in camera, but you can set up to shoot 4, 8, 16, or 32 shots. You definitely want to use a tripod. There's no motion correction here. You're going to take all those files, put them into NX Studio, and then at home you can build a raw file out of those multi-shot files. But you're going to get the benefits of extra resolution when you shoot 16 or 32 shots. You're going to get better color. You're going to get better noise. So it's nice that we do finally have an option for multi-shot on a Nikon platform. So the Nikon ZF has dual SD card slots, which is great, but it's in a configuration that I haven't seen in a long time. We have one UHS-2 SD card slot, and then we have a micro SD card slot. Now, no, this is not going to be as convenient as 2 SD card slots, but it does save space, and it does still give you the option to have that second slot for backup, double redundancy, JPEG to one, RAW to another, that kind of stuff. And let's remember that micro SD cards, you can get them very fast speeds, the same as SD card slots, so you're not going to have an issue with one slot being slower than another. Are they easy to lose? Absolutely. But are they also readily available, especially if you're traveling? Might you already have some for an action camera? Absolutely. And I think it's absolutely a better option than just having one slot. Now, I also want to talk about burst rates and the buffer on this camera, but this is a pre-production camera. I'm really going to have to wait till we have a fully reviewable copy to really get into the details. But this is what I can tell you. So first off, this camera can shoot full, RAW, JPEG, whatever, up to 14 frames per second with autofocus. That's very impressive. If you want to then go faster than that, you could shoot JPEG only, electronic shutter, up to 30 frames per second. You also have that same option if you want to do the pre-release modes when you're trying to capture that decisive moment. So do keep in mind that in electronic shutter, this is not a fast reading sensor. You're going to get some rolling shutter, so I would stick to mechanical. 14 shots a second is plenty. In the high efficiency star mode, which we love because the quality loss is minimal, I was getting close to a couple hundred shots before it slowed down. That was really impressive. And even in lossless compressed, well over 150. I mean, this is pretty amazing stuff. So I really want to see what happens when we have a fully reviewable copy, but it shoots for a long, long time before slowing down.
All right, Jordan here to talk about using the ZF for video capture. And at first I'm like, there's not a whole lot new here because I've been using the Z8 and Z9 cameras, which are some of my favorite video cameras out there right now. And the really cool thing is the ZF inherits a lot of that. So this is actually a huge upgrade over the previous Z6 II. Let's talk about the basics first. The ZF does have a microphone jack, a headphone jack. The USB-C port can be used to charge 15B and C batteries. And yes, we do have a micro HDMI port, which is very flimsy and will probably break your cables. But the good news is we don't have to use it that much because unlike the Z6 II, we can record internally in 10-bit H.265. This also gives you access to the N-Log profile, so we're not going to have to use the HDMI port to hook in an external recorder when we want good quality. As well, this is the first Nikon full-frame body to have a fully articulating screen, so it's the natural choice if you're going to need to film yourself and you don't want to put a monitor on top of it. We get some other nice things from the Z8 and Z9 though. I love the autofocus interface where you can just use the AF on button to initiate tracking and it'll stay on your subject. But we also get waveforms. The best way to meter out your scene is included in this. Now, one thing that hasn't been upgraded is we're using the same 24 megapixel sensor that we saw in the Z6 II, and that means there's going to be the same compromises there. We do have some pretty heavy rolling shutter when you're using the full width of the sensor. As well, if you want to shoot 4K 60p, it is going to have to crop into an APS-C portion of the sensor, but that's similar to most of the other cameras that we're seeing in this price range. So if you're a Nikon shooter and you can't afford to go up to the Z8 and Z9, I do think this is the best video camera in their lineup, especially if you need to film yourself. That being said, I don't love the traditional dials for shooting video. You know, the shutter speed dial's not a factor, your shutter speed's generally fixed. I do prefer kind of a more classic DSLR style interface like what we saw in the Z6 II, so I might hold off for the Z6 III if you don't need a camera immediately.
So our time with the pre-production ZF is just about over. And this is my first thought. And when the first ZFC came out, I fell in love with it instantly because I thought the styling was just so beautiful. But to be fair, it was basically a Z50 just with a retro design structure. And I thought that was okay. But the ZF, when I first picked it up, I assumed it'd be a Z6 II with retro design. And it's actually so much more than that. So what really struck me here first off is just how much of a test bed this is for new technology. I mean, things like having multi-shot now, things like having an 8-stop IBIS platform with the ability to center the IBIS on a focusing point, things like advanced manual focusing controls, which I really appreciate using my AI lenses. These are all new features I haven't seen before. I also find myself really enjoying simple features like having a black and white mode on here. I used the out of that. So then this brings up my second point, because this camera makes me question exactly where it fits in the Nikon lineup for a 24 megapixel full frame camera. What I mean by that is, as far as technology goes, you could absolutely look at this as a worthy upgrade over a Z6 II. I mean, is this the Z6 III? I don't know. I don't think so. I think Nikon will absolutely come out with something that's going to look a lot like a Z6 II, but incorporating a lot of the same technology here. You know, if the ZFC was just a reskinned Z50 essentially, when the Z6 III comes out, if it ever does, is that going to be a reskinned ZF? I think the real thing that you got to do is get down to your shop, get this in your hands when it comes out, and play with it, and make sure that you really like the control structure of this, the retro dials, using the LCD panel as your autofocusing joystick. You know, does this grip feel comfortable to you? Do you like the micro SD card slot as a second backup? I mean, these are things you have to be okay with. And if so, I think you'll really enjoy this camera. I really did. But if you want that larger grip, if you want the feel and look that you're used to in the Z6, Z7 series, I'd probably steer clear and just see what Nikon comes out with in the future. It might be very much like a Fujifilm situation where you've got an XS series of camera and an XT series of camera, and it's really the styling and the control structure that really drives you one direction or another. I can tell you this is absolutely a camera that we are going to revisit when we do get a full production version to do a full review on. Can't wait, because I enjoyed it a lot. Thanks so much for joining us. If you want to see that full review in the future, this is a good time to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and click that notification bell so you don't miss all of our future episodes. As well, check out our podcast. You can watch it right here on the same channel, or you can listen to it on all your favorite podcasting apps. Just look for the PetaPixel podcast and you will find it there. Otherwise, like while you're here, leave comments below, check out our Instagram and our Twitter. Please follow us on the socials there as well. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon with more PetaPixel.